Imagine walking into a school where the hallways are spotless. The classrooms feel peaceful. Students greet one another with quiet respect. And somehow, no one is yelling. No one is rushing. No one is waiting for someone else to clean up after them. At first glance, it looks almost too perfect to be real. But the biggest surprise isn't what these children learn, it's how they learn it. When people think about Japanese education, they usually imagine high test scores, long study hours, or strict discipline. But those aren't the lessons that shape Japanese children the most. In fact, some of the most important lessons are never written inside a textbook. They're quietly practiced, every single day. And by the time these children become adults, those tiny habits become part of who they are. Most of us grow up believing responsibility begins when someone tells us what to do. Japanese schools teach something different. Responsibility begins long before anyone is watching. Even something as simple as placing your shoes neatly isn't about keeping the hallway clean. It's about respecting the next person who walks through that door. Tiny actions, repeated every day, eventually become character, and character quietly shapes an entire society. But this is still one of the smallest lessons. The next one surprises almost every visitor who steps inside a Japanese school. Imagine finishing your math class, and instead of hearing the bell for recess, your teacher hands you a broom, not because you were punished, not because someone made a mess, but because keeping your environment clean is simply part of being a good citizen. In many Japanese schools, students clean their own classrooms, hallways, bathrooms, and cafeterias. There are often no full-time janitors responsible for daily classroom cleaning. To many visitors, this seems unbelievable. Why ask children to do work adults could easily do? Because the goal isn't cleaning. The goal is ownership. When children clean the space they use every day, they naturally become more careful with it. They waste less. They respect shared spaces. And perhaps most importantly, they stop believing that someone else will always clean up after them. It's a lesson many adults still struggle to learn. Psychologists have long observed something fascinating. People value what they help create. When you've cleaned the classroom yourself, you're less likely to throw paper on the floor. When you've arranged the desks, you're more likely to leave them organized. Responsibility doesn't grow from lectures. It grows from participation. Japanese schools understand this remarkably well. Instead of constantly telling children to respect their environment, they simply give them ownership of it. And ownership changes behavior far more effectively than rules ever could. But cleaning isn't the most surprising responsibility Japanese children have. Every single day, they also become responsible for something every child loves: lunch. And the lesson hidden inside that simple routine might completely change the way you think about leadership. In many countries, lunch is simply a break between classes. In Japan, it's another classroom. Students don't just eat together, they serve one another, they prepare the room, they distribute meals, they thank the people who made the food possible. And only after everyone has been served does the meal begin. No one rushes to be first. No one pushes ahead. Because the lesson isn't about food. It's about learning that leadership often begins with service. Long before children ever manage a company or lead a team, they first learn how to care for the people sitting beside them. And perhaps that's one of the greatest lessons adults spend their entire lives trying to rediscover. Imagine walking into a school cafeteria. Instead of cafeteria workers rushing between tables, you see children. Some are carrying trays. Others are serving rice. One carefully pours soup. Another quietly checks that every classmate has received a meal. No one complains. No one argues about who has to do the work. Because today, it's simply their turn. To many visitors, this seems unusual. Wouldn't it be faster if adults handled everything? Probably. But speed isn't the lesson. Responsibility is. Every child eventually experiences both roles, serving and being served. That simple balance teaches something many adults never fully understand. Leadership isn't about standing at the front of the room. Leadership begins with taking care of others. Before anyone takes the first bite, the entire class pauses. Together, they say one simple word: "I tadakimasu." There isn't a perfect English translation, but its meaning goes far beyond "let's eat." It's a quiet expression of gratitude. Gratitude for the farmers, the cooks, nature, the animals, and everyone whose effort made this meal possible. For just a few seconds, children are reminded that almost everything they enjoy exists because someone else contributed. The lesson doesn't end after lunch. Students clean the tables, organize the chairs, collect leftover dishes. They leave the cafeteria better than they found it, not because someone tells them to, because it's become normal. And that's the secret. Discipline doesn't feel difficult when it's simply part of everyday life. Small actions, repeated hundreds of times, quietly become habits. Habits become character, and character eventually shapes an entire culture. Behavioral psychologists often talk about something called the ownership effect. When people feel responsible for something, they naturally care for it more. It's why homeowners often maintain gardens better than renters, why people protect projects they've helped build, and why children who help create a clean environment are far less likely to damage it. Japanese schools don't teach responsibility through speeches. They create situations where responsibility feels natural. That's a lesson adults can apply almost anywhere. At work, at home, even in relationships. Instead of asking, "Whose job is this?" ask, "How can I leave this just a little better than I found?" That single question can quietly transform the way you move through life. Perhaps the most powerful lesson isn't about cleaning or serving food. It's about something almost invisible: time. Because in Japanese schools, being late isn't just considered poor organization. It's seen as something much deeper. And once you understand why, you'll never look at punctuality the same way again. Imagine arriving at school 10 minutes before class begins, not because you're afraid of getting into trouble, but because arriving early simply feels normal. In many Japanese schools, students aren't racing against the clock every morning. They've learned something far more valuable: that being on time isn't really about time. It's about respect. Respect for your teacher, respect for your classmates, and perhaps most importantly, respect for the promises you make. Think about the last meeting that started late, or the friend who always says, "I'm almost there," when they're still 20 minutes away. It may seem like a small inconvenience, but every minute someone waits is a minute of their life they'll never get back. Japanese schools teach children this idea very early: your time matters, but so does everyone else's. That simple belief quietly shapes how they approach work, relationships, and life itself. What's remarkable is that this lesson isn't taught through fear. Teachers rarely need to shout, because children aren't simply following rules. They're learning consideration. Imagine living in a community where everyone believes, "My actions affect the people around me." Suddenly, being on time isn't about avoiding punishment. It's about protecting someone else's peace. That's a very different kind of discipline. And perhaps a much stronger one. This mindset doesn't disappear after graduation. It quietly follows people into adulthood. The same student who learned to arrive before class becomes the employee who values other people's schedules, the commuter who waits patiently in line, the neighbor who keeps promises. Small habits, repeated for years, become invisible parts of everyday culture. That's why visitors often describe Japan as orderly, reliable, peaceful. The secret isn't perfection, it's consistency. Behavioral scientists often say, trust grows through predictability. When people know you'll show up when you said you would, they begin to rely on you. And over time, reliability becomes one of the most valuable forms of character. Success isn't always about doing extraordinary things. Sometimes, it's simply about being the person others never have to worry about. But perhaps the most surprising lesson Japanese schools teach has nothing to do with grades, cleaning, or even discipline. Instead, it's about learning that your greatest achievements rarely happen alone. And that lesson begins with something many schools around the world have quietly forgotten: working together. Think back to your own school days. Success often meant being better than the person sitting next to you. Higher grades, better rankings, winning the competition. Many education systems teach children to ask, "How can I get ahead?" But in many Japanese classrooms, children are encouraged to ask a different question: how can we succeed together? At first, it seems like a small difference. But over time, that single shift changes the way people build friendships, solve problems, and even lead teams. In Japanese schools, group activities aren't just another assignment, they're preparation for life. Children quickly discover that every person has different strengths. One student may be creative, another may be organized, someone else notices details everyone misses. Instead of trying to outshine one another, they learn to combine those strengths. And something remarkable happens. The goal stops being, who gets the credit? It becomes, how can we create something better together? Perhaps the most beautiful part is that cooperation isn't just about helping the strongest students. It's also about making sure no one feels left behind. Imagine being the quiet child in the classroom, the one who rarely raises a hand. Now imagine classmates turning toward you, waiting patiently, because they genuinely want to hear your opinion. In moments like these, confidence doesn't come from winning. It comes from belonging. And sometimes, feeling included is far more powerful than receiving praise. Modern psychology supports this idea. People are far more motivated when they feel connected to a shared purpose. When success belongs to everyone, people naturally become more willing to contribute. Trust grows, communication improves, and challenges become easier to overcome. Perhaps that's why many Japanese classrooms feel remarkably calm. The focus isn't on proving who's smartest, it's on making sure everyone learns together. Competition can inspire excellence, but cooperation builds resilience. Life isn't made up of endless exams, it's made up of families, communities, friendships, workplaces. And in each of those places, the people who succeed aren't always the most talented. They're often the ones who know how to listen, support others, and bring people together. Japanese schools quietly understand something many adults discover much later. You don't have to stand above others to become successful. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who help everyone else rise. Years later, most students won't remember every math formula they learned, or every history lesson they memorized, but they'll remember what it felt like to solve a difficult problem with friends, to encourage someone who was struggling, to celebrate a victory that belonged to everyone. Those moments quietly shape the adults they become. But the next lesson may be the most surprising of all. It isn't about teamwork, or discipline, or even respect. It's about failure. Because in Japanese schools, failure isn't treated as something to fear. It's treated as something to learn from. And that simple mindset changes everything. Think about the last time you made a mistake. Did you immediately feel embarrassed? Did you wish no one had noticed? For many people, failure feels like the end of the story. But in many Japanese classrooms, it's treated as the beginning. Children aren't taught that mistakes define them. They're taught that mistakes reveal where growth begins. A failed attempt isn't something to hide. It's evidence that you're learning. There's a quiet philosophy woven into Japanese culture. It's often described by one simple idea: continuous improvement, not overnight transformation, not perfection, just becoming a little better every single day. One more practice, one more correction, one small improvement. Over time, those tiny improvements create extraordinary results. Perhaps the greatest lesson isn't learning how to avoid failure. It's learning not to fear it. Because children who aren't afraid to fail become adults who aren't afraid to try. And that single mindset can change an entire life. But the final lesson isn't found in any classroom. It's found in the kind of person these children quietly become. One thing visitors often notice in Japanese schools is how naturally respect appears. Students greet teachers, thank cafeteria workers, hold doors open, return borrowed items, and speak politely, even when no one reminds them. Respect isn't reserved for special occasions. It's practiced through ordinary moments, small gestures, quiet words, simple acts of consideration. Because character isn't revealed during life's biggest moments. It's revealed in the smallest ones. Imagine a world where people cleaned up messes they didn't create, returned shopping carts, held elevators, smiled at strangers, not because they expected praise, but because kindness had become automatic. Japanese schools don't simply teach children how to succeed. They teach them how to live alongside other people. And perhaps, that's one of the most valuable lessons of all. Graduation marks the end of school, but it shouldn't mark the end of learning. Japanese culture quietly encourages curiosity throughout life. Learning isn't something you finish, it's something you carry. Every book you read, every skill you practice, every mistake you reflect on, becomes another small step toward becoming a better version of yourself. Education gives you knowledge, but lifelong learning shapes your character. Perhaps the greatest lesson Japanese schools teach has nothing to do with mathematics, history, or science. It's the quiet understanding that the person you become is shaped by the things you do every single day. Cleaning a classroom, serving a meal, arriving on time, helping a friend, respecting your surroundings, learning from mistakes. These moments seem small, almost invisible, but over years, they become habits. Habits become character, and character quietly shapes an entire nation. Maybe that's why these lessons feel so powerful, because they're not really about school. They're about becoming someone others can trust, someone who leaves every place just a little better than they found it. And perhaps that's an education worth pursuing, no matter how old we are. If this video inspired you, take just one lesson from today and practice it this week. Not all 7, just one. Because lasting change rarely begins with giant leaps. It begins with one small habit, repeated every day. If you enjoy thoughtful stories about Japanese wisdom, mindful living, and timeless life lessons, subscribe and join us for the next journey. Until then, take care of yourself, and take care of the people around you.